Welcome to the Alpha Girl Confidence Podcast, where we are empowering youth female athletes to play and live confidently. My name is Shay, and each week I will bring you new episodes to teach you the strategies and tools that you need in order to live a confident, empowered life both on and off the playing field. Hey, what's up? Welcome back to the show. So on today's episode, I wanted to share an interview that I had the pleasure of being a guest on. So I was on the Unlocking Your Ambition podcast with Megan Eddinger, and we had an amazing conversation around how parents can best support their players in building confidence both on and off the field. Megan herself is a sports parent, so we had an amazing, honest, open conversation around comparison, around competitiveness in the household, and just around all things youth sports and creating the best home environment possible for your youth athletes. So parents, this is an amazing episode for you to check out. Also, make sure you check out Megan's podcast, Unlocking Your Ambition. The link to her podcast is in the show notes below. All right, enjoy the episode.
All right. Today we have Shay with us. She is the host of the Alpha Girl Confidence podcast. She is a confidence coach for female athletes. Shay, I'm so excited to have you here today to talk to us about, how us moms or parents can support our, children, female or male, in, on and off the field. So happy to have you here.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. So before we dive in, can you tell us a little bit about, I was listening to one of your podcasts and you were telling a story about when you were 12 years old and, your dad and you had a dynamic, I guess, let's say. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So growing up, I played soccer, basketball, was really, really into them. It was a serious thing. It kind of ran my family's life. It seemed like, at least looking back. And my dad put a lot of pressure on me. He wanted the best for me, but he didn't always go about it the right way. And at the time I wasn't honest with him with how it made me feel. And I just, with the pressure that he was putting on me to, be better, to go play Division I, to be the best, like all of these things, I just had a really hard time with it. And it put a lot of strain on our relationship. And it wasn't until I would say college that our relationship started to get better. And we didn't actually have a conversation about it until like last year. Like I had a live conversation with him in my Facebook group about it. And it was just crazy because we just realized that like he was just trying to help me, but the way he was doing it was actually hurting me. And he didn't know that it was hurting me. Right. Mm-hmm. And so just like, if we would have had a conversation about it way back then, I think it would have solved a lot of strain in our relationship.
Yeah. And so would you say that, it kind of looked like this? So you developed an interest in a sport and, had some natural talent and, had fun with it. And then all of a sudden your dad had you on this like path and there was no real conversation around what your goals were. Is that a fair assessment of that?
Yeah. I mean, like, I definitely had goals of like, I loved it, right? I absolutely loved it up until a point, which we can get into later. But, when I was young, I was obsessed with soccer. I was obsessed with basketball. Like that's all I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And so, he, like you said, he kind of put me on the path of playing competitive soccer at the highest level, like the best club in the state. Wow. And so I loved it up until a point, until probably about, probably 14 or 15 is when I started to feel like it was more of a chore and honestly more of a job. I was coming back from an ACL injury, which was a really long, hard mental and physical process for me. And so that's when I started to not like the sport, because I'd say a combination of my own lack of confidence and also kind of the pressures that were put on me. And I started playing for him and my parents and less for me at that point. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Before we get too far into this, you made a little disclaimer in one of your episodes. So I'm going to do something similar here. Shay and I today are, having an open conversation based on my experiences and her experiences. This is not to, shame anybody's parenting styles or anything like that. We're definitely not telling you how to raise your kids. I'm a huge fan of take what serves you and leave what doesn't. Right. So if there's anything in this episode that you strongly disagree with, then go ahead and disagree with it, but no hard feelings there. But this is just a kind of an open dialogue.
Yeah. And I will say too, like, I am not a parent. So my experience is, and I won't claim to be an expert in parenting or a parenting expert, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm an expert in helping in kids, but the stuff that I've learned is from my own experience in a player's shoes and a young girl's shoes, and also trying to learn and do my own research and how parents can better help their children, with their confidence and their mindset and that kind of stuff. So disclaimer there as well.
Yeah. And so for anyone who hasn't been around long or doesn't know, I have a high school junior who is a 2 to 3 sport athlete, depending on, what's going on. I have a 6th grader who plays 3 sports, and I have a 10-year-old daughter who has a huge interest in soccer. So she plays soccer all year long. So that's kind of my background. We've played, everywhere from like the club level, just super introductory stuff with a bunch of dads coaching, all the way up through like pretty competitive travel teams as well. So it's really interesting to watch the different dynamics across the different sports. Even, I feel like different sports have different cultures where some behavior is more acceptable than in other sports. So when, in your experience, when a child is transitioning or trying a new sport, and, in general, they're pretty athletic, or maybe they're just there to, make friends or whatever, but they're struggling with the concept of the game or the technical aspect of, the coordination or things like that. How do you keep them, one, interested in the sport while maintaining their commitment to the team without kind of, being pretty overbearing about, the way we communicate that?
Yeah. I mean, especially a new sport, it should all be about learning and development, right? Like even with, if you're a pro, it's still learning and development, but especially for a new sport, like it can be hard. It can be really hard to grow confidence in playing a new sport. Like, let's say it's a, 12, 13-year-old playing soccer for the first time, and everyone else around them has maybe been playing since they were 5 years old. So it can be really hard on a kid mentally and confidence wise if they don't have supportive coaches around them, if they don't have supportive teammates and parents around them. So really just prioritizing growth and development, and also the progress, like the process and the progress that they make along the way, because there's no way in heck that they're going to be able to pick it up like that. I mean, maybe some kids are just very naturally gifted in that sense, but a lot of times it's going to be a bit of a struggle. And so really encouraging mistakes, encouraging learning, and encouraging progress over perfection. And when you do that, like, it's much easier for them to stay in the sport and be engaged, like you said, because then they're not like, worrying about being perfect and worrying about what, oh, am I doing it right? Is someone going to laugh at me? Like all of the dynamics there. So really just, prioritizing the learning, the development, and encouraging mistakes along the way.
Yeah. And even for athletes that have been in the sport for a while, right? Putting them in situations where they are challenged and they do fail is where they learn a lot. But I know that, losing isn't always as fun as winning, obviously. And so how do you balance that, providing your kids with opportunities that will help them grow without putting too much pressure on them so that they maintain that confidence?
Yeah, that can be kind of a tricky one, because I truly believe, like, I'm a super naturally competitive person, like very, very competitive. I want to win, like whether it's a card game or whether it's like, pickleball, I don't care what it is, like I want to win. And so I try to encourage, like, I think being competitive is great. It pushes you, it motivates you, but there also needs to be a balance between competitiveness and winning, and then also like having fun and learning along the way. And I don't think that you have to have one or the other. I think you can absolutely have both. And my personal opinion with this is that it starts with the coaches. Like, it starts with the culture of the coaches, which is why having good coaches is so important. But the hard thing for a parent is that you don't always get to choose your coaches, right? Like you have some say depending on what team you want to play for, what club you want to play for, but you don't always have control over the coaches. So my advice would be, in the little control you do have over that, is really find coaches that push your player, that push your son or your daughter, right? That challenge them, but also they're always top of mind is like, what are they doing to learn? What are they doing to grow? Because you can absolutely have both. And I think that's a misconception where a lot of parents I talk to, they're like, my daughter's coach is too nice. And I'm like, well, they can be nice and they can be challenging, right? Like they can be those things. So I would look for a coach that has both, because it is possible. And if not, like, then again, a lot of things do start at the home as well. So when you're playing, out in the yard, shooting hoops or juggling or whatever it is, like always just trying to, throw some competitiveness into it to learn how to handle, some of the pressures and stuff and the emotions that come along with that, but also having fun with it at the same time.
It's so funny that you say that, because I know some people are very much in one camp or the other when they play games with their kids. Either the kids always win, or it's like, hell no, they can never win. So I think, like you said, having a sense of that, like, healthy competition in the household is good too. I know for me growing up, games always turned into tears. Someone always left in tears. So I'm kind of scarred by that. I don't love to play, board games, but I will play soccer and like those types of things with my kids outside.
Yeah, it's so funny. Yeah, because mine, like, it was so like anytime I'll call them outsiders, so people that aren't in my family play games with us. They're like, oh no, we're playing with the Haddos. Like, oh, like they take it so seriously. But like I feel like we do take it seriously, but it's in a way that we can joke around with each other and have fun. So yeah.
Yeah, and you can bond. So getting back to that, providing your kids with opportunities where, they find themselves in situations where they're forced to learn because, otherwise they're set up to fail. We had some situations recently where we traveled for some competition and we didn't do so hot. And we all walked away with different experiences, right? So some of us walked away like, man, that sucked. I didn't love that. And some of us walked away like, this is awesome. This is exactly what we came here for. But keeping that line of communication open, we're like, I don't know. I don't love to watch my kids lose. Right. Sometimes I don't love to watch them win either, depending on the sport, but, but I always check on them after the game. Like, how are you? What are you feeling right now? What did you learn? Like, those are the types of conversations that I try and have after the game. Do you have any advice for like rituals or questions that we should be talking about post game?
Yeah, I actually just talked about this yesterday in my Facebook group. So that's good. So it depends on the player. I was someone that I did not want to talk about the game, especially with my dad. So you have to know your son or your daughter, and are they someone that likes to talk about the game after, or are they not? And I know this can be so hard for parents to not talk about the game, but first learning, like, what do they want? And if they don't want to talk about it, like, wait 24 hours, like give yourself a 24-hour rule so that everyone can cool down and then you can talk about it. Yeah. But if you are going to talk about it, I love what you said, and just like, how are you feeling? Right. So asking questions, if you're going to talk about it, let them lead, but ask them questions. So don't just start giving them feedback, because most of the time they know what they did wrong. They don't need to hear it from a parent, to be honest, but asking them questions. So how did you feel? Like, what did you learn? Like, what do you feel like you can work on at home so that you can improve for next game? And then I would always leave with, what did you do well? Like, tell me a couple things you think you did well, because I don't care if they played the worst game of their life. They can always find a few things that they did well, whether it was that they made one good run or they had one good layup or like something. You can always pull something good out of it, and just leaving with that, because then you're ending on a good note. You're ending with the positives, and it's a lot easier to think of the negatives than the positive after. So I always like to plug that in there to get them kind of thinking of more of like this like growth mindset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because again, depending on the sport, I have some wrestlers at home, right?
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes, right after the match is not the time to be like, so how do you feel about that?
Right.
They want their, their cool down time.
Yep.
And so sometimes it's, on the car ride home or, the next day, depending on what we're feeling.
Yeah.
But you said something else about feedback, and my husband and I it's not that we disagree. It's just that we have different habits, right? So for me, I have a very clear like division. Like they have a coach. I'm not here to coach them. I'm literally just here to be like, yay, good job. Right. So I really try to steer away from giving like technical feedback. What is your opinion on that?
I would be more like you, where it's like, you're not the coach, so don't say anything. Because here's the thing. I know there's a lot of parents that know a lot about the sport their kids play, and that's great. But if the parent is saying something different than the coach, it creates a heck of a lot of confusion. And then when they step on the field of the court, they're like, oh shoot, am I supposed to do? Coach told me to do this, but mom told me to do this. So like, oh, what am I going to do? And then they end up just like kind of freezing or not really like being fully present in the game. So I would ideally shy away from trying to coach like the technical pieces or tactical pieces of the game, unless you are 100% on the same page as the coach and it's something like that that the coach would say as well. Otherwise, like, you just want to avoid confusion at all costs, especially during the game. Coaching during the game, never, 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 never. So
Is there a sideline anywhere that the parents aren't like coaching from the sideline?
I would say it doesn't really happen. You know, what's interesting actually. So in college, it didn't happen. And what I've experienced is the higher level of a match, a game, the less coaching from the sideline there is. So if you go to a rec soccer game, I have a really hard time watching those because it's constant like shouting and coaching from the sidelines.
Yeah.
But if you go to a really high level like club game, you still might hear a little bit of coaching, but it's much, much less. And so that's what I've experienced in soccer, at least. I don't know about the other sports, but at least in soccer, that's what I've experienced. And I just don't think there's ever a reason for a parent to coach from the sideline.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I like that you said too, like if you're going to go there and provide the technical feedback, to really make sure that you and the coach are on the same page.
Yeah.
I know that my daughter gets, evaluated. So I know exactly where her coach feels that her strengths and her areas of opportunities are, so keeping those conversations really targeted that way.
Yep.
I still don't do it,
Yeah.
but
yeah. And also one point I'll make, like, if you are going to give feedback, like, don't just straight up give them the feedback, like maybe question them so that they can try to get to the answer themselves. Right. So just like prodding, maybe not, I don't know if prodding is the right word, but maybe asking questions so that they can kind of get to the conclusion on their own instead of it coming from you. Because a lot of time when it comes from the parent, they don't want to hear it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah.
So yeah, like, you know how it is.
I do. And so I know that you talked about this a lot, especially from going from like high school to college, where there's like not a skill gap, but like you go from being, the all-star on the team to someone who might not play a lot. And that does happen, when you make that transition from like rec soccer to more of a club, or other situations like that. And how can we support our children through that kind of transition?
Yeah, you're right. It's not necessarily a big skill gap, but it's like, especially from high school to college, it's more of like a speed of play gap or like a competitiveness gap, like just that grit, right? So supporting them and making that transition is trying to instill the habits of the higher level in them now. because it all starts with the habits and the mindset, right? That's like the big gap a lot of the time. And so trying to instill those habits now. So let's say that they're in high school and they're going to go to college next year. We'll start training like a college player now, like start doing the things now that college players do. Because then when you get there, it's like you're going to be way ahead of everybody. And it's not going to be, because it's a really hard transition, right? Or let's say from a recreational level to a club level, start training like a club level player, start doing training on your own, start being, you know, a little bit more competitive, taking it a little bit more seriously, so that when you do that transition, it's a lot smoother and less like, you know, of a big scary gap in between.
So good. And I know that you talked about this a little bit in your one of your podcast episodes, but how do we get our players to do those things on their own without nagging them?
You know what, if I had a straight up answer that solved this problem, yeah, that'd be pretty cool. But you know what, here's what I always say, because when we even say like, how do I get my daughter or son to do this? Like, you don't get them to do it. You can try, but what I say is like, one of the best ways that you can help shape their behavior, I'll say, is to model the behavior you want them to have. So if you want them to go train on their own, say, hey, Susie, I'm going to go run. You want to come with me? Like, let's like do it together. And I know, like, I don't expect parents to be running sprints and running routes and stuff like that, but at least like, you know, say, hey, I'm going to go, you know, do a little yoga. Do you want to juggle while I do some yoga? And just kind of modeling that behavior. Because I know from my experience, like if my dad told me to go juggle, like that doesn't motivate me at all, right? That doesn't motivate me. But if he's like, hey, let's go outside and juggle, like I'll film you or I'll count your juggles or whatever, I'm like, okay, cool. So just like doing the thing with them or doing it alongside them, or creating some kind of challenge, like a family challenge where it's like a 20-day like core challenge, like just kind of making it a fun family activity is one way to do it. And obviously that's not going to work for everybody.
Mhm.
And another way to do it is really just trying to encourage them to write their goals and their big visions, because without a goal and a big vision, it's like, well, what am I doing it for? But if they have these big dreams to play pro or play college or whatever it is, like, then they have more of a why and more of a purpose around it. So really just encouraging them to sit down, like maybe figure out get them to figure out what their big dream is, and then maybe planning out some action steps in order to get there can be a good way to do that as well.
Yeah. And what would you say is a good like age range to start that? Because I know with my 16-year-old, he wants to play in college. So we've had these conversations like, okay, this is what college athletes do.
Yeah.
You know, you have to balance your schoolwork and your work and your, you know, your athletics. But my 10-year-old,
Mhm.
you know, we have her on a team where she's being coached at a higher level so that if she wants to play at the high school level,
Yeah.
she'll have that opportunity. But we have not had that conversation with her about, you know, what she wants to do in 4 more years.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think like generally, if I have like a very general answer, I'd say like middle school. I don't expect a 10-year-old to know if they want to play in college. Some of them do. Some of them are like, I want to play pro and I want to play college, and that's great. But it's also okay if you don't know what you want to do when you're in eighth grade. Obviously, if you want to play in college, you definitely need to be instilling these habits by ninth grade, because that's when your academics starts to count and you have to really start building those habits, right? So definitely by high school, but I would say even middle school is a good time to start instilling the habits. And it's not like you have to like know what you want to do, but just thinking about like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if like I went and did this when I quote unquote grew up,
Right.
like, you know, just kind of just creating some cool, like fun activities where you can just kind of dream and about, you know, the life you'd possibly want to live, you know.
Mhm.
So it can just be a fun activity and it doesn't have to be like set in stone.
Yeah. And do you have any experience? I'm sure you do. Do you have any experience with kids comparing themselves to their friends who maybe are performing better or maybe have goals that are different from them, or, you name it, just that whole comparison thing and how that shows up.
Yes, all the time. Like I would say this is top 3 issues that I see with the girls I work with, and also one of the hardest to work on.
Mm-hmm.
Comparison is a beast, and I think we all do it. I know I compare myself to people, right? It's a really hard thing. So yes, I see it all the time, and especially, I'm glad I wasn't born and raised in this generation, but with social media, right?
So
Like
bad.
for us, we could only compare ourselves to the people on our team, our friends, so and so. But now they literally can compare themselves to thousands and millions of other people.
Yeah.
Right. So social media is big. So I'm going to touch on that first. And what I would say is, like, if you find if your kid is coming to you and you sense that they're comparing themselves to people on social media specifically, I would have them do a social media audit where every single person that they feel like they're comparing themselves to, go and either unfollow them or mute them. I've done that in my adult life several times. And it's not that these people are bad or that I don't like them. They're great people, but I just compare myself to them. Mm-hmm. And so I'll take a little break and then I'll be okay. Right. So taking kind of an audit or an inventory of how you feel when you get off social media is a big one. And then in terms of like teammates and friends and stuff like that. So this is hard because it's more like a mindset shift, or a mindset, kind of a shift in perspective. Because you have to realize and maybe tell your kids, like, hey, you can't compare yourself to Sarah, because Sarah is a different person than you. You are 2 different people. You're on 2 different paths. You're on 2 different journeys, and your journey, let's say you both end up playing college, your journey is going to look totally different. Mm-hmm. Like, we all have these different paths. We don't know what's going on in each other's life. You don't know what she's doing at home. You don't know what she has going on at home. You don't know what she's doing when no one's watching. So we can't possibly compare ourselves to someone else because we're 2 totally different people. So that's like one kind of perspective shift, is like, don't compare your chapter 2 to someone else's chapter 10. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's, sometimes it takes a while to kind of wrap your head around that. And then the other thing when it comes to comparing yourself, and I would also say like fear of judgment and fear of what other people think of you, is like, don't get down on yourself when you care what people think of you. Like, that's a very natural human thing. So just realize that as long as you care more about what you think of yourself, then it doesn't really matter what other people think of you. Mm-hmm. Like, if you love yourself and you think you're amazing, does it really matter what Joe Schmo says on Instagram? Not really. Right. So that's kind of like, I think confidence is a way to kind of like get over that. Like, having high confidence and high self-esteem and self-love is a way to like not let that get to you so much.
So good. And I was just having a conversation with a mom about this not too long ago, where she was feeling like her daughter was lacking some, confidence or self-esteem. And she was like, I give her a lot of positive feedback, but I feel like she doesn't hear it, or it goes in one ear and out the other. Or like, she feels like I have to say it because I am her mom. Do you have any advice in that area?
Yeah. A lot of times it's hard when it comes from the parent.
Yeah.
Right. And I know this. And so the thing is it's got to come from them first, in my opinion. So helping them to create habits or practices, confidence, self-love, mindset mastery, those are all practices. Those are all skills that you can learn. So starting to create some habits or rituals around positive self-talk. So, affirmations, or what I call wins, like writing down the good things that happen in your day or the things that you're proud of in your day. And like when I work with kids, it really is like, we go deep, like, well, why are you having these thoughts? Like, what's causing you to feel like you're not good enough? What's causing you to say that you're slow, or that your body's not how you want it to be? Like, kind of digging deep, which is hard for a parent to do. It's hard for a parent to do. So I'm not like promoting my services right now, but like having your kid have like a mentor or a coach to really like look up to, and just have someone to talk about these things. It's a lot different when it comes from a mentor or coach as opposed to a parent.
And we are going to plug your services. But I do agree, I know even when I was growing up, there were conversations that I would have with like an aunt that I would never have with my mom. Even though now I know that my mom asked my aunt to have those conversations with me. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you have, if you can hire a coach, that's awesome. But if you have um, some other adult figure that can kind of facilitate some of these conversations, that might be helpful too.
Yeah. And then just going back to the modeling thing too, like model, like maybe you guys write affirmations together, for a minute in the morning, or like, just kind of talking about the things that you love about each other and stuff like that. Just, trying to model the behavior that you want your kids to adopt from you.
So good. Yeah, I talk about that a lot where, your kids can hear you, right? So how can you expect your kids to practice self-love if you're over here saying things like, I can't believe I did that, I'm so stupid, or whatever it is, whatever your story that you tell yourself is.
It's huge. Yeah. And they're watching, kids are watching their parents more than they think. And also not only like listening, but also like watching body language and reactions to things. And a lot of times I think that it's subconscious too. When kids pick up on these things, they may not consciously know, like, oh, my mom doesn't love herself, but like, I think subconsciously it kind of gets implants there and follows them, for a long time until they can uncover that.
And you touched on something right there. I was listening to one of your podcasts yesterday, and I forget if it was you or your guest that mentioned, the first thing an athlete does when they make a mistake on the field is they look to the sideline for their parents, to see what their reaction was. So my reaction always is like, you're okay. Like, you're good. Thumbs up, But I know that that's not, especially if it's, something that the kid's been working on for a while, or something that they just flat out know better than to do, and it costs them. I know that it's hard to kind of like hide that, disappointment. But what do you have to say about that?
That's so funny. Because again, like yesterday, I did like the 3 mistakes that parents make. And this was one of the 3 things, was your body language on the sideline. And one of the moms, it was so funny. She commented, she's like, I just keep my mask on during the game. I just started cracking up. She's like, I just keep my mask on during the game. And then my daughter can't see. I was like, okay, well, that's one way to go about it. But like you said, just like a thumbs up, like, I know that's so simple, but usually it's so reactionary when your kid makes a mistake and you put your head down, or you smack your forehead, or you tilt your head back, you roll your eyes, like something like that. Like, they see those things, right? So like doing a thumbs up, or maybe a little golf clap, or like, you got it, like, good job. Just like really encouraging them and letting them know that it is okay to mess up. Like, I love you, and I know you love your kid, whether you mess up or not. But sometimes when you do these things, they maybe deep down subconsciously think, oh man, my mom doesn't love me when I make mistakes. And I know that sounds crazy, like, okay, Shay, a little over the top, but you get my point, right?
Yeah.
So really it's just like the thumbs up, like, smiling, trying to smile when they make a mistake, because they see those things. And I think over time that can make a big difference.
Wow. I'm just looking through my questions here. I think we've hit on almost everything. Oh, what do you say about players who perform really well? They don't struggle with confidence. Like, how do you get that player to balance, like, knowing that they perform well without like being a jerk?
Yeah. So, okay. Here's my take. When it comes to confidence, like, I think it's a misconception that if you're confident, you don't need to work on the mental side of your game. And that's absolutely not true. Like, look how many, like, Russell Wilson pays hundreds of thousands of dollars every year on his mental coach. Like Serena Williams, like all of these pro athletes, yeah, they're not confident all the time, but they're pretty dang confident, or else they wouldn't be where they are. But they still work on their mindset and their confidence. So when you're confident, realize that you don't know it all. Like, you haven't arrived, and you never will have arrived. if you want to get better, you can be confident and humble at the same time. I think the difference between confidence and cockiness, we'll say, is that confidence is you don't have to tell everyone you're confident, and cockiness is I don't think cockiness is actually confidence. I think cockiness is fake confidence where you lack self-confidence, but you have to make it known or try to make it known that you're confident. But I think it's just this false confidence that it's like everyone has to know you're confident. Whereas when you're deeply confident and self-confident, it doesn't really matter what anyone else thinks.
Yeah. And then last question for you. I know that you touched on coaching earlier, that like it all starts with the culture of the coach, right? And sometimes even the best, most positive, supportive coaches will lose their shit, right? And like I had a situation one time where I remember the situation, like it's ingrained in my brain. I don't remember what led up to the situation. My kid did something that he was explicitly told not to do, and it cost the team. And his coach in front of everyone was like, "You do not listen," like screaming. And I'm in the stands like, "Oh no."
Right.
Like I'm like almost in tears for him. But at the same time, I'm like, he's not wrong. Like he's not wrong. So like in those situations where your kid is like receiving that kind of feedback, but they need to hear it, what kind of conversation would you have as a follow-up to that as a parent?
Yeah. So like that's going to happen, whether it's a coach, even like you said, if they're the most positive coach, like sometimes they lose their shit and I don't blame them. Right. Like sometimes they have to. And it's going to happen when they have bosses or when they like those things are going to happen where they might get called out publicly. Right. But the thing is, and a conversation maybe to be had is like, hey, like, I know you got called out, but like, don't take it personally. Cause I think that's where it hurts so bad is when we get called out and we take it personally as if like, oh, they don't like me for me, or I'm not a good player, as opposed to like just what I did was wrong. So having the conversation of like, okay, number one, don't take it personally. Number two, you got to take responsibility for your actions. Like you can't like go cry and roll up in a ball because you did something wrong. Like you have to own it. You have to own your mistakes. You have to own your failures. And you have to like own like being able to handle that feedback. Right. So that's number two. And then if I had to add one more thing, be like, well, what did you learn from that experience? Like, I know it sucked and it was horrible, but I guarantee you there's something you can learn from it. So what did you learn from that experience?
Yeah. And do you think that a lot of families are having these kinds of conversations, or do you think that, the parents provide opportunities, the kids play, there's a perception of like pressure, but do you feel like a lot of parents are having any kind of conversation with their kids, or do you think it's all kind of left on the sidelines?
That's a good question. And I would say with my audience, they are having that conversation, but maybe it's just because we're talking about it and they're aware of it. But as it relates to like the mental side of things, I don't think that I think it's being had way more often than it was when we were playing sports, way, way, way more often. But I still think that I don't want to use the word taboo, but I think a lot of times kids think that there's something wrong with them when they do have these conversations. Like a lot of times a parent will come to me and say like, I don't know how to approach this with my daughter. Like, I don't want her to feel like I'm trying to fix her, like, and so from that perspective is trying to create a culture in the home that like working on your mindset and your confidence is a great thing. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. And it's only going to help you to become a better player, person, family member, whatever. So I think there needs to be more conversations, but I think there are a lot more than there used to be. But then again, like I said, I'm not a parent, so I'm not in the trenches. I can only say from my experience of like my community.
And so your audience, I know your services are for young women, young girls, but would you say your audience are their parents, or is your audience directly the people that you serve?
Yeah, I would say my audience is mostly the parents. And then, like you said, I work directly with the girls. But, it depends. Like my podcast, most of the time I'm talking directly to the player. Most of the time I do a little bit of both. Facebook, obviously, like I have a really awesome Facebook group. That's all for parents, although I do some player specific things in there as well. But yeah, I would definitely say that kind of like every messaging is kind of your daughter, and the audience is more of parents.
Gotcha. Awesome. Well, tell us where we can find you. Tell us about your Facebook group. Tell us how we can work with you. Tell us all the things.
Yes. So Facebook group, you can just search Alpha Girl Confidence. That's the Facebook group. And then we didn't talk about it, but I have a book also that would be amazing if you have, anywhere from like 10 years old to a college level daughter. It's called She the Confident, and you can find it on Amazon. Just type in She the Confident on Amazon. And then, yeah, just my website is alphagirlconfidence.com. I have a new program coming out in June, which is called the Alpha Girl Confidence Collective, the Alpha Girl Collective. So there's a wait list for that. You can join that. I'm super excited about it, but that's where you can find me and learn more about, reading my book and stuff like that is a great resource.
So awesome. Thank you so much. And we will definitely link all of that in the show notes so that it's easily accessible as well. And so Shay, one last piece of advice, if you could, if parents take one thing away from this episode, what do you hope that it is?
Let them fail, let them mess up, let them make mistakes, and don't try to protect them from it. Don't try to solve it for them. I know that's hard, but let them mess up and let them figure it out on their own.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Thanks, Megan. I appreciate it.